All right, the next video we're going to be watching is Ginger Prime. Ginger Prime, I brought up his tweet yesterday talking about what he thought was the stats or whatnot for what Dragon Age Veilguard is selling, right? Because people are saying that 86,000 or 89,000 is like really good. And he's like, it's not. And here's the reason. So he came out with a video about 17 hours ago talking about, so it's after our morning stream. He came out with a video talking about the breakdown and stuff like that, right? So we're going to watch this and see what he has to say about why he thinks, because numbers don't lie, you know what I mean? So he's going to break it down like he always kind of does, where he breaks down each of the things. We're going to watch that. If you like it, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. We'll react to Ginger Prime's video of his breakdown of why Dragon Age Veilguard sales figures disappoint and spells bad news for BioWare. Okay, bring this up.
I cannot wait to see how the media tries to spin the Dragon Age sales figures. Now, I have a pretty clear guess because we're still seeing them try to spin Alan Wake's 2 sales figures,
which still hasn't made money yet. Right? Alan Wake 2 still has not made money back yet.
In a positive light, with IGN tweeting, Alan Wake 2 continues to be a success for Remedy, with the company reporting it has recouped most of the game's development and marketing cost.
Right, most, but has not recouped the money yet.
As of the end of September. And for me, when I read this and when we do the calculations for this game, I'm telling you hands down, this feels incredibly dishonest. It's not that they're fully lying to us, but it's how they omit the truth and how.
Well, that's what most companies do, right? Again, they do this in the movie industry. The number one selling it's the number one movie at the box office, you know, for Memorial Day weekend or the end of October or whatever. They add those keywords there to make it sound like it's a bigger deal than it is.
They hold us back from the full picture of the truth. We've seen this happen before with them talking about Concord. There are
right. There's no spinning how poorly Sony's Concord open beta went on Steam. Over the course of the beta weekend, Concord already shaping up for its heavyweight hero shooter who could easily see competing with the genre. And we saw how that happened, right?
Countless examples, and it's not just IGN who's to blame here when we look at games journalism and the collapse of trust within the industry. I think it's clear when we see articles like this, like with what Kenneth is sharing to me here today.
Dragon Age Veilguard becomes EA's best performing single player on Steam. Well, those are dishonest because, sure, it's honest because it is the best one, but they also have never released day and date on Steam with their past game. When other games came out on Steam, they're like years later, and EA, Star Wars came out, the Star Wars Survivor, okay? And that was the first one. So when they say that Veilguard becomes EA's best performing single player, sure, there's been one other one.
The astroturfing is just absurd, and the report is that Dragon Age the Veilguard has become EA's best performing single player game on Steam. The truth is yes, for the longest time they have not launched their games on Steam.
Right.
So it is very clear that a established IP would have some modicum of success. I've never stated otherwise. What's not true about this is that how it's phrased is it's trying to push a positive narrative which is fine because obviously they're in the game, right? The marketing team and the company is in the game of trying to sell you a game. So they're going to tell you, right, that it's the greatest EA game made from BioWare, which is true, right? From their terms. It's the number one selling game on Steam, which is true from EA, right? There's enough word salad in there to make it that's what it is. In reality, had Dragon Age Inquisition or even other Dragon Age games launched day and date on Steam back in the day, like Veilguard did, you would see a vastly different number. And the reporting that has been going on around this game is piss poor, to say the least. Now, am I coping as Kenneth thinks that I am? Not really.
Oh, what did he say? I mean,
to say the least. Now, am I coping?
It's a single player game. My God, you're coping. I mean, we talked to Ginger, right? We had Ginger. Ginger's a pretty level-headed person, right? I mean, obviously he's a YouTuber and whatnot, but he's pretty level-headed when it comes to takes. He's not saying something just to put it out there to have a crazy take. He's pretty level-headed about it, and he tells you where he's coming from.
As Kenneth thinks that I am? Not really. Like, we're going to dive into the industry standard calculations of it. I just think that when it comes to this kind of reporting and these kind of
Dragon Age Veilguard launches has already made EA's biggest ever single-player game on Steam, topping the charts and beating out the concurrent 2003 Star Wars Jedi Survivor.
Articles being shared, there's a clear agenda, a massive amount of astroturfing to try and juice sales any bit, to try and recoup.
which you can't blame them because again, they're in the business to try to sell games.
Any amount of money that the dev team has lost, and we'll talk about the money that they've lost here in this video.
It's not like this is a EA thing. This is a business thing, right? You try to make it seem bigger than it is, right? Even YouTubers do this, right? They try to make them feel like they're bigger than they are. This is why YouTubers, they use bots. Streamers use bots because if you can think that they are bigger than they are, then they are, right? If they can show you that I have this many people watching me, well, then obviously that's how many people are watching them, right? But you don't know if they're fake or real or whatnot. You're just like, oh my God, this person has 1 million followers. But when you go look at certain channels and they have 1 million subscribers and you look at their videos and they get like 30,000 views, you're like, well, something doesn't seem to be adding up here.
Let's continue on because to put it into, I think, what would be a better comparison, I've seen people talk about Monster Hunter Wilds, I've seen people talk about Baldur's Gate 3, but I think the reality is that our better comparison is actually from Grand Blue Fantasy Relink.
See, I brought up Kingdom Come Deliverance because it's a single player game, and they literally just came out and said that they sold 8 million units, but 7 years. In 7 years, they sold 8 million units. And their numbers were just 10,000 more than Dragon Age Veilguard. But that's not a AAA game, though, right? This is a AAA game. This is a AAA studio making a game.
And Dragon Age Origin could not beat that niche JRPG in terms of its peak concurrent. And concurrent is also something that I say a lot of gamers get confused over. They think of it as total players, and that is furthest from the case. So let's dive into the numbers and break it all down. And listen, if you don't trust the numbers that I share with you here, that's perfectly fine. I mean, I get it, right? But I'm going to walk you through how these calculations are actually made and even talk about the reception on console and what numbers we can actually see over there. This isn't an exact number, only EA will have that. But from
right, so this is his guesstimation on what's happening on statistics, right, from the industry. This doesn't say this is what Dragon Age is selling, but this is what it's on pace on based off of these numbers that he's going to share, right?
From what I'm seeing, I'm wondering if they decide to share them with us and the public.
I don't think they will.
With all
the only way a company shares numbers is if the number's higher than what they're happy about it. If they're not happy about it, they will not share numbers. They will use generic terms of fastest selling game in a week, 2 weeks, in a month. It's the most popular EA game in Dragon Age. They'll use things like that, but they won't show you actual numbers. If they were confident, they would show you numbers.
All things considered. But being that I have a history of being wildly accurate when it comes to these calculations, we can just shake off the drama. We can focus in on the calculations, and with confidence, I can say Dragon Age Veilguard has sold anywhere from 1 million to 1.5 million units across all platforms.
Right.
And I'm trying to be very generous with my calculation.
Which we talked about last night with Kingdom Come Deliverance based on the numbers that they shared. They said they sold 8 million units total, but when the game first came out on Steam, it had 96,000 concurrent players. It sold 300,000 units, but 96,000 was the concurrent peak, okay? So just taking on that. Now, obviously, it's not a one-to-one comparison. We're just looking at the numbers. If it's 96,000 concurrent for that game, and they sold 300,000 on Steam, and this is 86,000, you know what I'm saying?
Now, for most gamers, this would be a success. Take Metaphor, for example.
Let me back up a little bit here.
1 million units across all platforms. And I'm trying to be very generous with my calculations. Now, for most gamers, this would be a success. Take Metaphor, for example. But success in this video isn't measured by total sales, not only making back the cost of development and marketing.
Right. And people think, and again, with movies as well, when I tell you a movie has to make $650 million, everyone's like, wow, that doesn't seem right. Like, yeah, no. There's actual cost, okay? When you make a budget of a movie and it's $200 million, you're adding an additional 150 to 400 million, right? Or I'm sorry, 150 to 200 million, which is a total of 400 to 450 million dollars for that movie. And then the theaters take a cut, and the production takes a cut, and everyone takes a cut. So when they make profit, you got to take that away from it first before it needs to get it. So it needs to make 2 times that to make its money back because they're giving percentages away.
But also to try and make more money than they would have made had they just invested that money in the marketplace. So now, my fellow math nerds, we're going to get into the weeds and really talk about how these calculations and how they're made. And just note, this is a moving target. We've already seen numbers.
Right. Don't take this as official. This is just, he's telling you the thought process
of how it's going.
Adjust accordingly across the board, with what we saw estimated around 500,000 originally has now been estimated down to 429,000.
He's talking about this bottom number right here. Okay. Now, obviously, this is an estimate, okay, of 144,000 up to 429,000. So you take it to the middle, the average would be around high 200s, a low 300s, which is about right, because that's exactly what we're talking about for Kingdom Come to Deliverance when it first came out, right? 300,000 people bought the game, but 96,000 were concurrent. This is 89,000 people are concurrent, and they're saying around 429,000, which I think is less than that, right?
From additional sites, I come up with a different number, but it's well within that same range. So here are the ways that I go about calculating the total player base. First, I start with the industry standard range of 7 to 11x multipliers.
We talked about this a little bit yesterday, right? The 7 to 11 average.
On the average concurrent. The second way is I look at the total hours played divided by the average play time, which tends to give me a number smack dab in the middle of that range. Now, granted, things are changing and things are moving, and my original...
all the time, right? Again, I said this yesterday. If something's really good, like I put a video up and it does extremely well in the very beginning, well, projected-wise, it could be millions of people, right? But then it tails off and time passes and time continues moving, and less people watch it the next hour, or more people watch it the following hour, and it constantly fluctuates, so it goes down and up. So it's not just a official, well, it sold this many, so it's going to sell that many.
Estimates actually calculated the range from just under 500,000 to a little over 720,000. But with the numbers coming in this weekend and as everything looks, it actually is closer to 400,000 to just under 700,000. So we're going to be...
That's on PC. So he's saying that they sold about 700,000, between 460 to 700,000 copies.
And we're going to be using a generous number here.
I think it might be a little too high at this point.
We're going to be looking at 720,000 units on Steam and how this then translates over to console, because it's not one-to-one, but it's a definite heat map, and we do have some insight into console numbers as well. So first and foremost, this is also right in line with what Game Analytic has estimated. And remember, I'm being generous to try and overestimate sales, because we're going to also later in this video talk about refunds, because there's a chance that it's much worse than we think. Now, what's important to remember is this game has taken over 8 years to develop, and
right, 8 years to develop. They redid a whole bunch of stuff in the game. It used to be a live service game. It used to be a multiplayer live service game. It was almost like Anthem, but in the Dragon Age world. They had a completely different story. They had a completely different team. They fired people. They changed the story. They brought it back. I believe they changed it twice, if I'm not mistaken.
We're going to estimate some of the development costs based off of Dragon Age Inquisition, but also the fact that 8 years, multiple restarts, has definitely cost the company probably more than what we're going to estimate. But let's focus in on what revenue was generated first, so we can see how clear a difference this will end up being. Taking the most generous number of 720,000 units.
Because they also could do this, right? They could also do this as a business. I don't think anyone will bring this up. Let's say they were making Dragon Age Dreadwolf, okay? For the company is putting money into Dreadwolf. Dreadwolf is the game that they're making. But then they decide that we're stopping Dreadwolf and we're creating Veilguard, okay? So let's say they did 2 years, 3 years of Dreadwolf, okay? Even though it's production in the team's working on Dreadwolf, and they change to Veilguard, EA says, we're paying the bills for Dreadwolf. Dreadwolf gets scrapped. They just scrap it. Tax write-off. They put it up the thing. And then Veilguard starts, and then they start saying that they've put money into this, and Veilguard is what this is, right? So in the back end, they could have 100 million, 150 million into Dreadfall, okay? And then on this new one, they could have another 200 million on Veilguard. But the combined total that EA spent on BioWare making this stuff is like 400 million. Now, they're not going to recoup that Veilguard, because that's not all Veilguard's numbers. Now, I'm not saying this is what they did. They could be doing this. Or Dreadwolf and Veilguard are combined together. If they are, then this budget's a lot higher than it is. But if they separate the two, because one was a separate game, they canceled it, moved on, tied up, and then started over with Veilguard, then it's a completely separate game behind the scenes.
On the PC at $60, this equates to a little over $43 million. And with that number, we can calculate the 30% that Steam will take at just under $13 million, bringing total Steam revenue to $30,313,100. And no, we're not factoring in taxes, just
basic numbers.
Steam isn't the whole picture because obviously you have EA Origin, EA Play with their
which we would never know how many people unless they share that number.
Upgraded tier, and obviously Xbox and PlayStation. So we're going to peek behind the curtain and see what is truly happening. So let's talk about the game development budget. Dragon Age Inquisition 10 years ago had a budget of $150 million. This has led to some to speculate that this game has a bigger budget due to having to start and restart the project over the last 8+ years before releasing the game this October. But for the sake of keeping it simple, let's actually stick with a budget of $150 million for Veilguard. And while you normally spend a ton on marketing...
Yeah, but that's spinning it, Jones? You know what I'm saying? So if they report that this is... They're not telling you the other thing that they spent money on. But BioWare and the company that's making the game, they've spent that money. But they'll tell you that just the number off of this, even though they still have to recoup that other money that they've tossed away, right? Like Sony right now needs to recoup the money they spent on Concord. They need to make that money back somewhere. You know what I mean?
Marketing... We're also going to just keep it simple and put it at $50 million for marketing, bringing the total up to $200 million invested. Now, the general rule within entertainment and Hollywood is
I'm going to rewind that for a
take the
second.
same development budget
and
you spend that dollars for Veilguard. And while actually stick with a budget of $150 million for Veilguard.
You say 115 or 150?
It's simple. Let's actually stick with a budget of $150 million for Veilguard. And while you normally spend a ton on marketing, we're also going to just keep it simple and put it at $50 million for marketing, bringing the total up to $200 million invested.
Okay, so it was 150 and then 50 million. It was 150. 150 plus 50, so 200 million. Okay.
The general rule within entertainment and Hollywood is that you take the same development budget and you spend that same amount of money on marketing.
That's correct.
So you could see here that this could be an easily overestimated low number, but for the sake of simple math, we are going to keep it at that 200 million. Now, some has speculated that it's over $250 million, but again, ultimately, we don't know. And if it ends up being $250 million for...
Again, we don't know. We're just assuming based on other games of this type, how much they're spending.
Development, you can see.
And the development time.
Here how the amount of units they're going to need to sell has to be increased dramatically, because this isn't a game about selling 1 million or more units. They have to sell an estimated 4 million units, if I'm being hyper
4 million off of this number that he's coming up with. They might have to spend more. 5 is usually the roundabout number with these prices of games. Again, we don't know the budget.
Generous to make back the money, and then some to make back the money that they could have lost doing anything else. That means that over 8 years of development, had they invested $200 million in the market, and the average being around 14%. And no, we're not going to be factoring in compound interest because that just makes this number even worse, for them. Keeping the math simple as possible, they not only need to make back the $200 million originally invested, but also $28 million a year for over 8 years, bringing the total cost to just around $425 million to tie the market. And the reality is this is going to be much closer to $600 million, but we'll keep it here for now. Now, I was asked, do I think that Star Wars Jedi Survivor slopped? Because when we compare...
I think it did, because of the licensing they have to get from Disney and Star Wars.
Dragon Age Veilguard to Star Wars, the number...
But you got to remember, Star Wars Jedi Survivor was the last game in the contract where they were the only ones to exclusively release a game at that point, right? After that game came out, it was a tail end of their contract with EA and Star Wars. So that contract was way back when in 2012, 2013 when they signed it, and they made Battlefront 2, Star Wars Jedi Survivors, Jedi Fallen Order, the games that they've created, Squadrons, all of those games were in a licensing deal from 12 years ago, okay?
Numbers from Concurrent did beat out what Jedi Survivor did. However, Jedi Survivor did not sell.
According to Game Sensor's forecast, the game managed to amass nearly 40 million in sales, with over 700,000 copies sold across various platforms. And we found out that it sold a little less than 1 million or 1 million.
An insane amount, with estimates ranging from 700 to 1.8 million units sold.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
I'm thinking of the wrong Star Wars. Star Wars Outlaws just sold less than 1 million. I'm not sure what this one sold. My apologies. My apologies.
Of that game. So I wouldn't actually classify Star Wars Jedi Survivor a flop if it made back its money and made enough to cover the spread of the licensing fee that they have to pay to Disney.
I think they've already paid the licensing deal. Again, I don't know if it's true or not, but that licensing deal was included in the price when they did it back in 2012.
For that,
they were they had an exclusive deal for 10 years or whatever the hell it was, and that's what they did.
So one thing or another, if you would think that it flops, this is kind of going right in line with that. If you just take a look at the numbers in the range. But if you think that it was successful, I can see how you can easily draw that conclusion that Veilguard is successful. But the counterpoint would be is that it didn't take Star Wars Jedi Survivor 8 years.
Right. It didn't take them 8 years. It took them 3.5, I think.
Development and multiple restarts and a lot of turnover to have that game actually release. Okay, so let's now pivot to the conversation of consoles, because we are looking at just over 700,000 on PC. How is console faring? We're going to begin with Dragon Age Inquisition, having the game reported over 12 million copies sold for that game 10 years ago. And this is where I can easily understand how people get overexcited and misunderstand what concurrency means within the base, but also that Dragon Age Inquisition did not launch on Steam day.
Right. So to compare it to other Dragon Age games on Steam is just ridiculous, because this game didn't come to Steam until 6 or 7 years afterwards.
And date, and it just has an all-time peak concurrent of just under 5,000 players. But that is something that we can use to start to see how this story would change. Now, being that we do not have exact numbers on Xbox, we do have some ways to estimate it. And we're going to start again with Dragon Age Inquisition, clearly seeing here over 270,000 players when true achievements is tracked. This does not represent the whole, but this does represent a good portion of the gaming player base. You can see here also within that 255,000 have tracked, and that's a 95% ratio for the first achievement that the game has for its story. Now, where is Veilguard currently? Well, it's sitting at 10,000 tracked achievements. And when we look at how many people have completed the first storied part of the game, you can see here a 99% clear ratio. Why is this important? Well, I would estimate
they're data points. They're data points. You can take that data point and say how many people purchased the game.
Also a multiplier of 10 when it's all said and done. So I could easily say and feel confident that on Xbox, Dragon Age, the Veilguard has moved at least 100,000 units. But how's it faring on PlayStation? PlayStation has the bigger player base. So let's again start with Inquisition from the PS3.
You would assume at 3-to-1 ratio, right? Because they have 3-to-1 PlayStations over Xbox.
To the PS4, coming in from the tracking of PSN profiles at just under 500,000 units. How is Veilguard feeling? Right now, it's just under 3,000 players.
Ooh, that's not good. That is not good. Again, this is not the 1-to-1 number, but this is a reference percentage-wise like you would do with Steam. Steam has 86,000 or 89,000 people playing. You can say that this percentage of people are bought the game on Steam. Same thing over here. Game owners, 2,619. So you can times that and say, okay, well, it's got this many people that are owning it.
Players tracked with a roughly 93% completion rate of the first trophy for that game. Again, when we start to think about how this gets multiplied out, I do not think these numbers are wildly accurate to the total players.
Sure.
However, they do offer a interesting heat map, and
it's a data point, right?
Will continue to be adjusted. These numbers are going to go up, but I would venture to bet that this is not going to hit anywhere near the highs that we saw with Dragon Age Inquisition based off of its reception. So with 700 plus sales on PC, I think we can really safely estimate that they have another 700,000 units across console, which roughly brings us to my 1.5 million units sold. Now on console, the game costs $70, so that would be $54,538,050. But we then take the platform cut of 16 million, bringing the total to $38,176,635. So bringing in the Steam numbers and pushing that up to just under 70 million.
That's $70 million in his estimate. His estimate, based on the numbers that he gave us, based on the stats and the data points that he gave us, roughly estimated after the cut from the people that take their cut, okay, that they have $68 million total, right? So if the game costs, what do you say, 200 million, 250 million, and they have 68 million right now. Now, obviously, in the long period of time, they don't have to make all their money back week one, month one, right? But right now, they're nowhere close to being successful of what they wanted to be if these numbers are in the range of accurate.
In dollars. Earlier, we talked about the calculation needing to bring in $425 million to tie the market, assuming you're not bringing
the market, okay,
in compound interest and other factors, just trying to keep the math as simple as possible so everybody can follow along at home.
Right.
That would have the game at its current moment with a total loss of $355,510,265 if I'm being
right, left over, right? Taking the number they just made and then subtracting from the total budget after the marketing and after all the other stuff, they need another 300 and what?
And its current moment with a total loss of
$355 million, okay? Now, obviously, they can sell more. They can sell down the road at half price, full price, right? The marketing team right now will go into overdrive. They'll spend more money paying for advertisers to say this is the greatest game in October, November. They'll show you charts of where it is. They'll tell you on the Video Game Awards show, they'll put it into the Game Awards where it'll get some awards or nominations for awards to kind of hype it up a little bit. These are all paid. These are all paid things to try to get advertisements of what it is, okay? Because that's what the Video Game Awards show is. It's a marketing tool to tell you what games are good or not good and who pays a little bit more to get into certain categories, okay? And if you don't believe that, I'm sorry to tell you, that's what happens. That's what they do in the movie industry. That's what they do in the music industry. And that's what they do in the video game industry as well, okay?
$510,265 if I'm being generous. Now, obviously, EA and Origin Play, that's just going to be a rounding error at this point. Because the next bit of the conversation, the final piece of this video, is going to focus in on refunds. Now, you can see here, multiple sites are reporting the average playtime is just 0.5 hours.
Where's that at? 0.5. Okay, I see it.
This is important to note because I do think that we're going to see a massive amount of refunds for this game. And Steam shares this data with...
But that's all of Steam. That's all of Steam. That's not just that game for Steam.
With us. Now, just note that this is total site-wide, but you can see here on October the 31st and the weekend of November the 1st through the 2nd, there has been a clear spike in the amount of refund requests having been made. This isn't going to be one-to-one to Dragon Age the Veilguard, but it does show that things are happening. And then when you factor back in the overall average playtime being well within the Steam refund policy limit, I think one of two things has happened.
Yeah, well, my uncle works at EA. And he said this game is doing amazing, so this is all BS. Okay, send me a direct message what your uncle's name is. Let me fact check that.
People are either not really liking the game and deciding to refund and move on, or people already didn't like the game and they wanted to go leave a negative review and then refund their money as well. I think that's going to be something that's going to play out in time, and so over the course of the next several weeks, we'll have a even clearer picture. If we get any official announcement or official news from the developers, that will be very interesting, because if they have taken such a bath, I don't know how you could spin it in any other way other than that this game has not lived up to its expectations.
Of course not. Of course it hasn't lived up to the expectation.
I think the standard Square Enix style of reporting has failed to live.
If this was a smaller studio and it had these numbers, no problem. This is a AAA fourth version of a Dragon Age game where the other ones have sold 3 million, 6 million, 12 million copies. This is a big franchise for BioWare. This one at these numbers is not very good.
Live up to expectations, which doesn't mean it isn't profitable. It just means that it didn't make the money that they were hoping that it would
at this time, right?
Make. Right now, at the time of this recording, I don't think Veilguard is a profitable game, which would put it in the category of a failure
as of right now, because this always changes over time. It could sell more copies over the holidays. It could boost it back up to catch up where the projections were supposed to be, right? There are lots of things could happen.
failure because no one is making games to lose money. But we will see how this shakes out, and we'll see how accurate I am or inaccurate when it's all said and done. These numbers don't lie. They tell a very interesting and painted picture, and it is a interesting conversation when it comes to the culture war within gaming and the impact of Gamergate 2.0. And
yeah, but I personally don't give a shit about that stuff. I like stats and figures and stuff like that, and what he just put in front of us tells us a story, right? And that story tells us that the game is underperforming of what it is, based off other similar type games around that same number and what it made and didn't make, right? Right now, they didn't make money, right? Right now, it's not projected to make their money back. That could change, right? But if you start seeing more advertisements, if you start seeing more stuff, that's more money they've put out there to try to get people to come back and go, no, this is what it is.
whether developers and publishers will learn lessons or whether they're going to be stuck in a hard spot, kind of a damned if they do, damned if they don't approach to making games, because either they have to bend the knee to the chuds or they have to bend the knee to the wokies. And
Right, and that's the two sides, right? Where when you have reporters coming out calling people that are speaking negative about it to the chuds, you have the other people saying, well, these people are the woke. They're both on the same coin. They're both bickering back and forth with each other just because, well, I think it's popular, and the other person's like, well, you think it's popular, I hate it to death. Right? And vice versa. I hate this piece of shit. And they're like, well, it's the greatest game I've ever had. And this is why I said, take the 9s and 10s, take the 0s and 1s, move them to the side. What's the average person look at what the game is? And that's what the game is, right? Then you can look at the game objectively of what the score is. And then when you play the game, you go, oh, you know what? It has a good story. It doesn't have a good story. Now the game mechanics are not good. They have great game mechanics, whatever it is.
use those terms loosely. We don't want to get into the definitions here because it just means we're going to spend too much time trying to agree on what words mean or what they don't mean. But now I think it's time that we wrap up this video with style, with our message.
All right, so we'll leave it there. So check out Ginger Prime. He's got multiple channels. I think that's a pretty level-headed take about numbers, right? All he did was take the numbers that were to us based on other games, based on what they're saying, based on the achievement list, based on all this stuff, right? So I think it's a pretty level-headed take of numbers, right? We love numbers. We love when someone says, oh, they're selling like hotcakes, and then you show them a number that those don't equal hotcake. Okay, so looking at the game, saying, look, I say it, even though they're two completely separate games, when someone says 330,000 concurrent players is a shit number for Starfield, but then someone says that 89,000 is a fantastic number for Dragon Age, is insanity to me, especially since one is an established IP that's been around for 20 years, and the other one is a brand new IP, okay, with a company that's been around for 30 years. It makes no sense. Make it make sense to me. How is 330,000 concurrent players shit? They didn't make any money, and then on the same platform of Steam, 89,000 is a success, and it's amazing. It doesn't make sense, okay? No one can make it make sense because it's literally just people hating the other side because of what their viewpoints are instead of just looking at the data, right? The data. Argus says, come on over and watch the homie Ginger Prime I mod for Brian. I love to see anyone, you over there when I stream, or you can watch some of his vids. Yeah, like I said, I like watching Ginger when I have time. I don't get to watch him live or anything like that, but I listen to his podcast every once in a while. I watch some of his videos every once in a while. I like when he has like takes like this because he is pretty accurate when it comes to stuff like this. All right, let me put the music back on. Ron says, why are PlayStation 5 games on PC? Because console sales are lackluster. Yeah, Ron, that's exactly right. Shh, don't tell people. ban Argus for advertising. Dare you? How dare you talk about a person that's been on my stream? We used to do a podcast together on Lono's thing. It was short-lived. It was short-lived, but we did it. He's got a couple of channels. Yeah, if you guys didn't know, I did an interview with him earlier this year. You can check out that video.